My name is Wayne Gates. I live in Batavia, Ohio, which is just a few miles east of Cincinnati.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about your early life and where you grew up?
I originally grew up in northwest Arkansas, in a little town called Berryville, which is about 10 miles south of the Missouri border. And then I ended up moving over to Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is a county that borders Oklahoma. So I was up at the very tip northwest corner of Arkansas and spent first 18, 20 years of my life up there.
Okay. And I understand you served in the Navy. Was this something you had wanted to do since you were young?
No, not really. It was just a case of I got to a point where I made some poor organizational decisions and I got married and I really didn't have a career. So it became a case of, well, I need to take care of my family. I need to get out on my own. I can't ask my parents if I can live with them with my wife, but I was working at a radio station at the time. I had been in the broadcasting world for a while at that point, 4 or 5 years, but it was a case of I'm barely making enough money to get by, and I knew that I needed to sort of jumpstart my career, and I knew that military service would give me a little bit more credibility and give me a chance to earn a living and gain some skills and that sort of thing. So it was a necessity on my part to do that, but it was something that I was not opposed to doing because I have had a grandfather that survived the Pearl Harbor attack, and he was in the Navy for a while. And I had an uncle that fought in Korea, had another uncle that fought in Vietnam. So I was no stranger to the concept of military service. So I went to a recruiter's office and signed up, and I don't regret it. I spent 6 years in the Navy, and it was an interesting time. Boot camp was an interesting mental exercise because anybody that one of the things, rewinding just a little bit, military service is kind of interesting these days because less than 1% of the population is on active duty at any one time, and the number of veterans in the country is down to about 7%. So people have these ideas of what the military is like and what boot camp is like and things like that. But I can tell you that boot camp is essentially an effort in playing mental games and putting people under artificial pressure to make sure that if they can't handle that pressure, they are going to demonstrate their inability to adapt and adjust in boot camp when the stakes aren't nearly as high and when lives are at stake out in the fleet, as they say. That's when you want somebody who they know that can handle the job and handle the pressure. So boot camp, if you look at it sort of analytically and from a big picture standpoint, all they're trying to do is frustrate you and rush you and make you mad. So if you go into it with the idea that you know what they're going to try to do, then it's not really all that difficult. It's only 8 weeks. Then you get some skills training in whatever job you choose, and then you go to a command, and it's just like any other socialization procedure. Everybody's got their own little rules, their own little rituals, and you just kind of become part of the team. So I actually enjoyed my naval service. I was assigned to a fighter squadron, VF-211, out of Miramar in San Diego, and I just kind of showed up. I had no exposure to naval aviation at that point, to naval aviators, to F-14 pilots and radar intercept officers, or RIOs as they call them. and they have their own language and their own culture. And with the job that I had, I spent 95% of my time around those officers rather than other enlisted people. So I was kind of by osmosis absorbed into that naval aviator culture.
That's really interesting. I mean, just to be around those people, I think. I mean, 'cause you're right. It's a lifestyle in a way. So,
Well, it's a lifestyle, but it's also a group that considers itself elite, and they are. It's just like any other group of people that consider themselves elite. They value things that they can do. It's famously difficult to land a fighter jet at 200 miles an hour in the dark at night on a rolling deck, and it's hard to do, and it's dangerous work, and they're good at it. And just like the enlisted people that work on the flight deck, if you watch a documentary on that stuff, or my favorite part of the Top Gun movie is realistically, it's like the first 3 minutes when they have the music comes up when they're getting prepared to do flight operations, and then they play Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins over some of the video that they have that was shot on the flight deck. The flight deck is a very dangerous, interesting, and beautiful place all at once. Just to sit up there and just be up on the island and just be able to watch that stuff going on, where somebody can be 10 feet away from death, behind them, in front of them, and on either side, but everybody knows what they're doing and everybody's trained well. And just to watch those planes take off and land, and all of the people that are involved and every little intricate part of that process, when you sit back and think about it, it really is kind of amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I loved it as a kid. So I told you, I spent a lot of time in San Diego there. So I loved watching the F-14s come and go as a kid. It was amazing, especially after the movie Top Gun. You know, when every young child wanted to be the next F-14 fighter pilot. So of course you were in probably one of the most iconic scenes from Top Gun, in which this character, Air Boss Johnson, more or less runs over you as you're carrying a tray after dressing down the characters Viper and Jester. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got the part and how old you were at the time?
Well, I think they filmed that movie we had come back from a deployment in the last half of 1985. So I think they filmed Top Gun at Miramar in the summer of 1986. So that would have made me 23 years old. So they were getting prepared to do Top Gun because the movie had the cooperation of the Defense Department, as you're probably aware. And that meant that the Paramount crew was all over Miramar. And since our fighter squadron had just been on deployment, we were going to be back for a while. We didn't go back out until 1987. So they knew that we were available. And so the casting folks came up to what the aviators refer to as the ready room, where they all gather for their briefings and that sort of thing. And they were looking for naval aviators to be extras in the background of some of the training scenes in the movie. So I can watch those training scenes and look in those back rows, and I can pick out 10 or 12 of the officers that I'd been on deployment with, that I talked to every day, and that I still am in touch with on social media. And they were looking for them to be extras because they had flight suits. They didn't have to go out and dress them up or anything like that. And they were about 2 doors down from me going through this. They'd go in, they'd talk to them, and they'd leave. And I waited until the last officer had come out of there, and I walked in and said, "Do you need any enlisted people?" And the guy said, "Oh, I don't know." And then he picks up this Polaroid camera. This kind of dates it technologically, and takes my picture and said, my name, my phone number, said, "All right, well, if we need you, we'll be in touch." So I walked out thinking that, nothing was going to happen. And about a month later, I get this phone call asking me if I'm still interested in being in the movie. And of course, that was my first exposure to that sort of thing. So I said, sure. And they said, "All right, we'll be here at the hangar at sunrise on Saturday." So I said, okay. So I drove up there, and we were there all day long. They take advantage of every minute of sunlight. And it was me and I think about 4 other enlisted folks. They told us to wear our dress white uniforms, which when we were working in the office, we would wear what we called dungarees at the time, which was essentially those blue jeans and blue shirts that they phased out since then. But that was just one of the many tiny little nitpicky inaccuracies that the movie had in it. But anyway, so we're standing there, and actually the first scene they shot, I'm actually in the background of that as well, because if you remember the movie, after Charlie, the character that, her name slips my mind, Kelly McGillis played, and they had that little confrontation. I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you, that kind of stuff. So there's a scene in the movie where Charlie confronts Maverick, and they're walking down the hallway, and they're talking, "Why didn't you tell me about the MiG? I'm an instructor at this school. I see hot shots like you every day." And there are people walking in and out of the offices behind them. And I'm the third person that walks out of the office on the left and walks all the way down the hall, then turns and goes on the right. So if you knew me, you would recognize me, and you could just see like a little glimpse of my face as I turned the corner. So it's one of those like, okay, hold on, so wait, there I am. And I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. So they shot that probably 10 times. Somebody's timing was off, walking out the door. One of the actors blows a line. There's a light that's out of place. You know how that production stuff works. Obviously, anybody that's got anything to do with shooting movies or creating videos or anything like that knows that you just do those takes over and over again, and they just keep the best one that they like. And that was fine. And it was time to do the famous scene where Air Boss Johnson comes down and confronts these guys. And of course, it's shot out of sequence. So we're just doing this scene with this dialogue. We don't know what precedes it or why. And I'm standing around with these 3 or 4 other guys, and Tony Scott, the director, short little Australian guy, walks around the corner, looks at us for a minute, points at me and says, "Hey, you, come here." And I followed him, and he said, "Okay, take this tray of coffee, walk around the corner, and you're going to get run into, so don't look like you're expecting it." And then he walked away. And that was all the instruction that I had. And I guess he's used to professional actors. For all he knew, I was a professional bit part actor instead of just an actual Navy extra. But he left his instructions, and he's going about his business. So I just kind of had to learn on the fly and just kind of do what made sense. So they hand me this tray, and they fill it with these 3 cups of colored water. And they have put a uniform on me with a E6 or 3 stripes on it, and they expect me to walk down the hallway carrying coffee. But anybody in the Navy would know that you don't act like a waitress, and if you were, it wouldn't be an E6 who is one step away from being a chief, carrying coffee to anybody. But that's just, again, one of those little tiny little nitpicky things that people that have been in the service would know. But I just carried the tray, and, you know, sometimes he'd mess up, sometimes I'd be a little fast, he'd be a little slow. But the whole idea was for him to walk out the door at speed and have me be at a certain spot. So I'd have to kind of play it by ear. Like I start walking when he says a certain word, and I'm a little slow, so I need to speed it up a little bit. But anyway, we got the timing down before they started rolling. Then we ended up getting 9 takes, and I got run into 5 times with the full spill, and then they ended up just keeping the best one. At one point, Tony Scott said, "It seems to me like you're anticipating a little bit, so that's why I'm staring at the tray, because he told me not to look up and look ahead, because if I saw him coming, he was afraid that I'd flinch or move. So he said, just stare at the tray and keep walking." So that's what I did, and eventually we got the take that we wanted, and that was that.
Oh, that's an interesting story, actually. So, of course, it's interesting for me on a personal level, too, because I don't know how many hundreds of times I've probably seen Top Gun, but... okay, so there's some people online, there's all this stuff online, everybody's got their own opinions. They claim that your character, so you're carrying your coffee on this Pepsi tray, that you're somehow showing this Pepsi logo, this Pepsi tray to the camera as you get hit, like this is big advertisement for Pepsi. Were you told that, hey, let's show this tray to the camera, where it's like this branding thing? And I mean, it seemed kind of far-fetched, but it was something it seems to be floating around online.
It's an easy conclusion to jump to if you don't have any of the context, because yes, it does look like I intentionally flash that tray at the camera, but the reality is I didn't even know what I was supposed to do once the hit came. I didn't know where the camera was, and of course the primary rule is don't look at the camera. So the camera is to my right, and I'm sort of kind of supposed to step out of the way, because once he hits me, the focus is on him saying, "Damn it, that's twice," and stomping off and screaming, "I want some butts." So I've got to get out of the way. So when he hit me, I stepped to the side to try to get out of the camera shot, and I guess my hand just kind of, with the tray, just kind of strayed, and that it ended up looking like it was intentional. All I was trying to do was just get the hell out of the way.
That's pretty good. That's kind of what I figured, but you know how the internet works sometimes, and I mean, it seemed like you would have flashed it for a little bit longer than that, but. I've been bumped into by the air boss. Now I will have a delicious Pepsi. Yeah, I mean, well, and I did think it was weird. I remember it because when I bought the film and I was, of course, just a kid, Diet Pepsi there was this huge Diet Pepsi ad before the beginning of the film began. So Pepsi must have been like, I guess one of the big sponsors or out there anyway. That was the first, when the movies were still on VHS at the time, that was the first pre-ad prior to the movie that any movie ever had. So that was the predecessor for the 12 minutes of stuff that you used to have to fast forward through when you rented a movie back in the late 80s and early 90s. Yeah, because I definitely got it in VHS, because it was 1999, I remember, for that VHS, which I think, geez, relative to inflation and the price of new DVDs, I mean, that was pretty expensive actually back then. Or it was like $26 or something. I mean, relative to inflation for back in 1986, so that was a lot of money, but... Yep. So you had mentioned to me that you shot 2 other scenes for the film, but that they never made it into the final cut of the film. Can you tell me a little bit about these particular scenes?
Well, actually, the hallway scene did make it into the film, as did the coffee spill. But the final scene that did not make the cut was I was preparing an airplane for pre-flight, right? So they put me in the dungarees. So I'm supposed to walk around this airplane on the flight line with and be getting it ready to fly. And of course, that's not my job. And I didn't have an auxiliary power unit out there by it or any tools or anything. So basically, I'm just walking around inspecting the airplane, like running my hand over the wing and looking up into the intakes and just trying to look busy and not look at the camera. And I thought I pulled it off, but for some reason that scene actually never made it. It was me and 3 or 4 other people doing the same thing. So it would have been one of those zoom out things that you wouldn't wait. I think that's me, but they ended up not using that.
Huh? Yeah, that's interesting. So, did you get to interact with the cast and the crew very much? And if so, what were your impressions of all the actors on the set and the energy like? And...
Well, the short answer is yes. There were so many people running around that one of the things that I remember, there are a couple of things that stand out to me. I had just gotten there on Saturday morning, and I was at the crew services truck getting some breakfast, and there's this guy with a flight suit standing next to me. And I didn't know whether or not he was actually in the Navy or with the crew. And one of the things that I did not want to do is act starstruck. I was there for the experience, but I'm not going to go run up and say, "Oh my God, Tom Cruise, please sign my autograph book." I didn't want to behave like that. So I turned to the person next to me and said, "Hey, are you in the Navy? Are you with Paramount?" And he said, "I'm with Paramount." And I said, "Oh, what's your name?" And he said, "Anthony Edwards." So I ended up talking to Anthony Edwards, the guy that played Goose, over breakfast for 10 or 15 minutes. And he was interested in what I did, and I was interested in what he did. So the interaction was actually kind of fun. But when the actual scenes are being filmed, it's all business. You're not there to be a tourist, and that's one of the things that they told us. You do what you're told, stay out of the way. Time is money. So there were times, a few times actually, between takes where they would get things ready to go, and I was standing there literally within arm's reach of Tom Cruise and Anthony Edwards while they're standing out there at attention. So again, the conversation just kind of, they would be interested about my world and I'd be kind of interested in theirs. And we just talked like people at a ball game or, at a park or something like that. It was just an interesting exchange of conversation. And, I got along fairly well, I think, with all of them. I never talked to Kelly McGillis because she, I guess, was in her trailer or didn't have a whole lot to do after that one scene. Maybe she left early. And then, like I said, I was there for one day at the actual filming. Then the rest of the time when they were on the base, I was actually at work. So it's not like I'm going to go hang around the set because they were there for 2 or 3 months. And it was just kind of like, you do your thing and we'll do ours, because like I said, it was a business to them. There wasn't anything for them to get excited about, because once you kind of get used to each other, you just kind of like give everybody your own space.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. Did you guys have any idea that Top Gun would, be this huge hit at the time?
No, of course not. It was kind of cool. The Naval Aviators liked the attention, and it was kind of cool to be a part of. But when it blew up, it became actually more interesting from there. And, you know, the Naval Aviators, like I said, they enjoyed the attention, and it was kind of interesting culturally to see all of that happen. I got to go to the premiere in San Diego. They actually had two premieres. I went to the first one where they were essentially saying, "Hey, thanks for being an extra. Now you can watch the movie." And that was not the quote unquote red carpet premiere with all of the actors and the producers and stuff. That was like 2 or 3 hours before. But one thing that was really interesting to me was to sit in that movie with a bunch of naval aviators who fly these F-14s for a living and listen to them watch the movie and see how those flight operations are portrayed, because there are a lot of things about the flying in that movie. While it's visually exciting, it's absolutely not what these guys do. Like, for example, when the closest they ever fly together is a mile apart, and if they violate that, that's a huge big deal. That's a disciplinary issue, because it's a safety issue, because these things are flying at 600 or 700 miles an hour, and they'll go 1 mile in less than a second. So you have to just be careful about what you're doing. So the whole, flying together, ice, get out of the way. I've got a shot. Oh, I almost got him. Ice, get out of the way. Oh no, we're in a flat spin. You know, that whole scenario is impossible and ridiculous. And then they're flying over the desert, and they're in a flat spin, and then all of a sudden they're, quote, heading out to sea, and the naval aviators are laughing and screaming at the screen. And when they have these combat scenes, they're yelling advice at the airplanes, like the airplanes are flying toward each other, and they're yelling, "Shoot him in the face, drop your chaff, where are your flares?" It was just very interesting to hear. It's like doctors watching a doctor movie or firefighters watching a firefighter movie. It's just they find it difficult to suspend their disbelief. So it was kind of interesting to watch it from that point of view.
Oh yeah. Does anybody ever recognize you? I mean, after the movie, I'm sure, of course, I'm sure you look a lot different now than you did 30 years ago. But after the film. Or did guys you worked with kind of go, "Hey, I remember you from the movie," or razz you about it, or?
Well, that was kind of a double-edged sword, to be honest with you. I was a little unhappy after the first 2 or 3 years after the movie came out, because the people that knew me, I think, they would never admit it, but I think that they were a little jealous that I got to do something that they didn't. So the teasing was good-natured on the surface, but it was a little bit strong underneath. There was just this little bit of element of resentment to it, and I got called Coffee Boy and all of that stuff. And it's funny the first couple of times, but after the 20th or 30th, it starts to get a little old, So that finally kind of wore down. And then myself, I'm just not this kind of person that meets a total stranger, and the first 30 seconds into the conversation, I'm like, "Oh, and by the way, I'm in a movie." I just didn't go down that road. I didn't feel the need to, because I thought that it would just not. It would reflect poorly on me, because people tend to not like people that behave that way, if you know what I mean. So that was one of the issues that I dealt with. And then obviously 30 years later, I'm a little older, and it's the same thing. If I wanted to pull out my phone and go to YouTube, the coffee spill scene is on YouTube, and it's got a bunch of views. But I'm not going to be the person that runs up to people and says, hey, look, this is me. I just don't want to do that. But the people that I work with, the people that find out, they seem to take great joy in telling other people that I'm in the movie. So then I have to explain it, and then we have to watch the video, and then we all have to laugh about it, which I don't mind. It's good-natured by this point, and it was 30 years ago. It was a little, like I said, it was a little more pungent when the movie first came out, but today it's just almost part of the introduction process. I don't say anything, but eventually it comes out because I'm not going to lie about my military service or something like that. But it's just not the first thing that I want to just grab somebody by the lapels and say, I've been an extra in a movie.